The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're located today. I'm Charles Stute, Vice President of Marketing at Red Booth, and I want to welcome you to today's session, The Art of Change, Moving Your Company from Email to Collaboration Software. Today we're going to be giving you some best practices for onboarding and adoption and making the transition as smooth as possible and maximizing the productivity of your teams as you're doing it. Today I'm really excited to be joined by a friend and colleague, Carson Tate. Carson is someone who has actually lived this challenge firsthand and is actually now an expert in making that change. She's the author of Work Simply and a pioneer of the 4 personal productivity styles, and she's led change management initiatives around the employee use of technology at organizations like Coca-Cola, Merrill Lynch, Deloitte, Wells Fargo, and others. And she's an expert in facilitating adoption of new technology and improving team and company-wide productivity. So I think you'll find today's session really informative and enlightening. Before we get started, I'll just mention a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, we will reserve time for Q&A at the end of today's session. And you'll note on your GoToWebinar control panel, sort of towards the middle there's a section for questions. So feel free to, as we're going through the content today, drop your questions in there and we'll be sure to address them at the end of the session. Also, I wanted to mention that we will be recording today's session and that will be available for playback after. We'll be sending links to everyone who's registered, as well as the slides themselves if you're unable to view the slides today. So without any further ado, I will turn it over to Carson and we'll get started.
Great. Thanks, Charles. Well, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're located. I'm really glad to be with each of you today. So as Charles said, first and foremost, we definitely want to make sure that we hear from you. And this webinar is not a one-way street. And so throughout the webinar, I'm going to be asking for some input from you and asking you a couple of questions. So we're going to be using the polls feature and GoToWebinar. So don't be shy. I want to hear what's on your mind and what's working or not working for you. And again, just to reiterate, we will answer all your questions. I know there'll probably be a few that will come up, and we'll just reserve those till the end of our session together. So as they come up, use the question box, type them in, and then I'll go through each of them with my colleague Charles at the end. So I want you to imagine this scenario. If you hit print while you were in your inbox, your computer might crash and then it would start spewing messages all over the place. Far-fetched? Not really when you consider some of these statistics. Email volume is growing at a rate of 66% per year. Workers spend over 41% of their day managing email. So 50% of your time almost just managing your email. And on an average day, workers check email and IM over 77 times. Well, it's no wonder that you and your employees and colleagues are spending hours every day in email. So probably as a result, and while you're on this webinar, you really want to either transition everyone onto a collaboration platform, or you really want to speed adoption to that collaboration platform because you want to improve company-wide efficiency. You really want to enhance your communication effectiveness, save time, and ultimately improve your team's productivity. Well, if you want to do all of that, which you can, it's time to learn the art of change. But here's where it gets a little tricky for leaders, because change on this scale can be really challenging, and there's often a risk component as well. I mean, everyone in your organization is using and knows how to use email. And convincing and then leading a team or an organization of thousands and thousands of people to change to a new communication and collaboration solution can be really hard. And if the adoption of the new solution doesn't go well, then it can reflect poorly on you. So how can you ensure a smooth, successful transition and adoption? Learn the art of change. So your webinar takeaways, and for investing your time today with us, the first thing that we're going to look at is really getting clear on why is change so hard? Why is it hard to lead organizational change? Then we're going to identify the 3 roadblocks to leading successful change. And then we're going to end by helping you understand how to use the 5 best change management practices to successfully move your company from email to that collaboration solution. So if you're going to lead change in your organization, the first thing is we have to define what is change. So what is change? Well, if we go to Webster's dictionary, they define change as to transform or convert, to make the form, nature, content, future course of something different from what it is. That sounds a little convoluted to me, I think. For me, when I think about it, all change efforts, bottom line, all change efforts, whether for organizations or individuals, have something in common. For anything to change, someone has to start acting differently. So ultimately, every change effort, and this is both changing individual behavior as well as large organizational change, boils down to the same mission. Can you get people to start behaving in a new way? So change for me is all about behaving in a new way. And that's where it gets really hard. So here's the first poll. I want to hear from you. Why is change hard in your organization? So you're going to see a poll box pop up on your screen, and it's open. So please jump in and participate, and then we're going to share some of the results that we get from you. So as I'm looking at the poll trending right now, I'm seeing that a lot of folks are saying that change is hard because people are overwhelmed. The next one that's getting a lot of traction is you already have so many projects and ongoing initiatives and just that bandwidth issue. And then the good old office politics and bureaucracy. All right, we're going to leave the poll open for maybe another 30 seconds, so make sure you get your vote in there, and then we'll share the final results. Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for participating. So the final results now, so 42% of folks said that change is so hard in your organization because your people are just completely overwhelmed by their day-to-day responsibilities. The second highest, at 29%, was that you already have too many projects and ongoing initiatives, and just the thought of adding something else is overwhelming. And then coming in third at 21% was just office politics and the bureaucracy around managing and leading change. And all of that sounds very, very familiar, and you're going to actually have strategies and tools to address each and every one of these. So thank you for participating. So now we know what change is, we know why it's hard in your organization, but there's also kind of fundamentally that global question around why is change so hard? And I intentionally put my favorite food group, chocolate, it is a food group, on the screen because I think that really sums up why chocolate is my favorite, but also why change is so hard. We see change is hard because it involves 2 independent systems at work at all times. So first, there's the emotional side, and it's the part of you that's instinctive, it feels pain and pleasure. And then there's the part of you, the rational side, also known as our reflective or conscious system, and it's the part of you that deliberates and analyzes and looks to the future. And as we've all probably experienced, the emotional and instinctive side can be kind of weak. And at least in my case, it can be lazy, and it's often looking for that quick payoff over the long-term payoff. For example, if I want to be healthier and not eat so much sugar, I've got to stop eating the chocolate cake. I've got to avoid it. So I've got to avoid the short term, it's delicious, it makes me feel good, the quick payoff, for the longer term payoff of ultimately improving my health. And see, change efforts are hard because the type of change we want, it typically involves those short-term sacrifices for those long-term payoffs. And when we're trying to change things, we're usually trying to change the behaviors that have become automatic. And the larger the change you want, the more it's going to deplete people's self-control. And as we all know from personal experience, I would imagine, is that self-control is an exhaustible resource. So if I have had a really long, stressful day, it's so hard to resist that chocolate cake at dinner, after dinner, sometimes before dinner, but it's really hard to resist it because it's rapidly consumed throughout a normal day. So when people exhaust their self-control, what they're exhausting are those mental muscles that are needed to think creatively and to focus and to inhibit their impulses and to persist in the face of frustration and failure. In other words, we're really exhausting the mental muscles that are needed to make that really big change. Change is hard because we wear ourselves out. So as a leader and as a team member leading a change, to ensure that successful, smooth change effort actually occurs, we've got to navigate these three major roadblocks that are going to derail any change effort and ultimately exhaust our employees and team members. Change is hard because we wear ourselves out. So let's look at the first roadblock. So the first roadblock, and you probably have already experienced this one, as soon as you mention to your employees and colleagues and team members that you're transitioning and adopting a new communication and collaboration solution, you've probably have felt and received some pushback or resistance. And your first thought is probably, why are they not being a team player? However, what looks like resistance is often a lack of clarity. The first roadblock to change is not resistance, it's a lack of clarity. We will all spin our wheels indefinitely unless given clear direction, and the spinning of the wheels will exhaust us. So that is why, to make progress on change, you've got to show your employees and colleagues exactly where to go, how to act, and the destination to pursue. So your first step to successfully lead a change effort is to point to the destination, because change is easier when you know where you're going and why it's worth it. And the goal here is to paint that rich, detailed picture of what the right destination looks like. And we often call that the to-be state. And this destination is concrete. You can see it in your head. It's also motivational. You can understand why it's a destination worth chasing. Because remember, you're competing. You've shared with us, you're competing with a lot of other initiatives and programs in your organizations. So why is it even worth the effort? And it's clear enough that you know when to celebrate. Because really, in my mind, no change effort is really complete unless we're popping the cork on some bubbly and you've got some champagne. So when you are thinking about your destination, one thing I'm going to give you is a framework to kind of guide you here and to make sure that the destination is both concrete and motivational. You want to ask yourself, does it pass my champagne test? So is your destination clear enough that people will know when to celebrate? We have to know when to celebrate. We have to know when we get there. Are you focused on outcomes? All of us work in organizations that have metrics. So Can you align your destination to some metrics and clear outcomes that align to the strategic goals and priorities of your organization? And are people really going to know when they've reached that to be state? Okay, so now it's your turn. I'm going to have you do just a little reflection. So I want you to think about, what is your destination? Remember, your goal is to paint a clear picture of the destination, because what looks like resistance is often just a lack of clarity. So what would your destination look like if you were adopting a new collaboration communication solution? So think about that for a minute. So here's a sample, or here's my example of what the destination would look like. And in fact, this is the destination that we actually used in my organization when we transitioned. So it's a single platform where I can quickly communicate with all of my colleagues. I can share ideas. I can track and manage my projects. I can access and store information on my projects, and receive real-time updates on my projects. There's less chaos and more collaboration. So now let's evaluate this destination using our questions. So is this destination clear enough that people will know when to celebrate? And I would say yes. And these are pretty specific, measurable outcomes. So I would say, yeah, the team will know when we can celebrate. And are you focused on the outcomes? Well, let's look at it. So yes, it's a single platform. I want to be able to communicate, share ideas, track and manage, access, store, and receive real-time updates on my projects. Now, the next question, the third question is, will people know when they've reached your to-be state? And I think it's really summed up nicely in the last sentence. Well, yeah, there's less chaos and more collaboration. You want your destination to be concrete. You can see it in your head. So there's no abstract, fuzzy corporate language here. This is concrete. And it's motivational. You can understand why this is a destination worth changing. I want this. I want it to be easy. I don't want to work so hard. And it's clear enough that I know when we're all having champagne or whatever your favorite celebratory beverage is. So now on to the next step. Once you've clearly painted that picture of the destination, now you've got to tell me what to do. You need to script the critical moves. Remember, folks, change wears us out. Folks get exhausted. So we want to be very specific around what to do to reach that to-be state. Now, here's where it's hard. At least I think it's hard. We have seemingly limitless choices, and more options, even good ones, can freeze us, and they make us retreat to our old behaviors or a default plan. So as we face more and more options, which is what a change initiative does initially, there are more options, we become overloaded. And choice no longer liberates, it debilitates. So choice no longer liberates, it debilitates. The more choices we're offered, the more exhausted we get. Change is hard because we wear people out. And so to prevent exhaustion, we really want to be clear on how people need to act. And this is where I've gotten in trouble in the past as a leader and seen other leaders and organizations falter in leading change. And we assume that the new moves are really obvious. And when you assume, this was shared with me in college when I submitted a very poor philosophy paper, but that's a story for another day. But when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me. So we want to clearly describe the behaviors. And to create movement, you've got to be specific and concrete. We want just one place to start. So now let's think about what the critical moves might be to reach your destination. And we want to make sure we've got the right critical move. So if you're trying to decide between different critical moves for your team, consider using this checklist. So first, is it specific? I think you're hearing and seeing a theme here, concrete, specific. Is it doable? And would it provide a quick win? These two in my mind are interconnected. Your folks are overwhelmed. There are too many projects already on their plate. So if this change doesn't feel doable and I can quickly be successful, we got a problem. We don't have the right critical move. And would it create positive peer pressure? We all remember high school and peer pressure. Well, peer pressure can actually be a very, very good thing when it's constructive and positive peer pressure, and we want to create positive peer pressure to drive this change. One other critical move that I would suggest is just asking yourself if what you're suggesting passes the video test. And what I mean is, have you made your request so specific and so behavioral that a third-party outsider could watch a video of your team and confirm whether or not they'd heeded your critical move? So now let's do another reflection. So maybe you've thought about, hopefully you did, had a chance to think and reflect on your destination, painting your picture. Now, as you think about where you want to go and this transitioning and the adoption and onboarding of your team to the communication and collaboration solution, what are your critical moves? Remember, the goal is you want to script the critical moves and specifically tell me what to do. So here are two critical moves that I came up with. First, well, actually, let me share with you a current example of something we were wrestling with on our team. So now, let's say currently on your team, after each one of your team meetings, an email chain gets started with people sharing additional information and reporting on the action steps that they've completed post-meeting. And as time goes on, you've got this long email chain. It gets longer and longer. And who is doing what is no longer clear. You don't know what document you're working on. It's a mess. So if the destination that we're trying to reach is that single platform where you can quickly communicate with everyone, track and manage projects, access and store information, and receive real-time updates, then here would be two critical moves. First, all team meeting materials are posted and saved in the communication and collaboration solution. And then the second one, all pre and post team communications are conducted in the communication and collaboration solution. So let's evaluate these critical moves and see if they're a good critical move, if they're specific. So is it specific enough? Yes, I've clearly said team meeting materials. So very specifically defined what type of materials. And then I've also identified the very specific type of communication. It's the team meeting communications. Then the next question we're asking ourselves is, does it feel doable? And I would say I think these do, because I didn't ask my team to post materials and communicate on any and all projects that they're working on and every meeting that they are participating in. We just focused on one, just our weekly team meeting. Would it provide a quick win? Absolutely. And will it create positive peer pressure? Well, yes, because the team will be able to see that everyone's participating. And if I'm the one that starts that really long, clunky email chain, well, I'm going to feel a little left out. So at this point in your change effort, you've pointed to the destination. So we're clear on where we're going. We know it's worth that effort. and you've scripted the critical moves to ensure that you actually arrive at your destination. People know specifically what to do. However, you start to notice something. You start to notice that change is not really happening as quickly as you hoped, and it looks like some of your colleagues are getting a little lazy. However, what looks like laziness is often exhaustion. Remember, change is hard because it wears us out. So to combat the exhaustion, your first step is to find the feeling. Now, I can imagine you're probably rolling your eyes at this point and wondering, wait a minute, feelings? Does this really matter? And in my experience in partnering with organizations as they lead change efforts, they can be pretty resistant to this step in the process because it really does feel a little squishy. I get that, and a little too touchy-feely. And how is this really going to impact the change effort? Well, I hear you, I get it, and I hear it all the time, in fact. However, knowing something is not enough to cause change. So I want you to think about maybe the last time you made a New Year's resolution to get healthy and go to the gym, which is one of the most popular New Year's resolutions. And you made it because you know that physical exercise improves your health, your productivity, and extends the quality of your life. However, does that knowledge alone motivate you to get out of the bed at 5:30 a.m. when it's dark outside and go to the gym? Well, no. However, if you're going to the gym to get in shape so you can complete a breast cancer awareness walk and raise money in honor of your mom who beat breast cancer, you better believe it, you're getting out of bed. You got to make people feel something. So now I want to hear from you. We're going to do another poll. What might be in it for you and your organization if you move from email to a collaboration platform? So this is your with them. What's in it for you? What's in it for me? All right, the poll is open. So let's see. What's in it for you? All right, the early results, it's trending that about 58% of you are saying that it's faster and easier to communicate, and then coming in a close second as the numbers change, it looks like I can quickly and easily find information. And then about 11%, 10% are saying that you're going to have more personal time, which is great. All right, we're going to leave the poll open about another 10 seconds or so, and then we'll share the results. Okay, we're going to close the poll. Okay, so the final results, 59% of you said, what's in it for you? It's faster and easier to communicate. Absolutely. And then 32% of you said, I can quickly and easily find information. And then 9% of you said you're going to have more personal time, which is great as well. Knowing something is not enough for people to change. You've got to make them feel something. So our goal is to help your team find that feeling. You've got to motivate your team. And one way to motivate action is to actually make people feel as if they're already closer to the finish line than they might have thought. So you want to shrink the change. So Dave Ramsey, he is a personal finance guru, developed this strategy that I think is so cool and really powerful, and it's called the debt snowball. And the debt snowball is how you shrink the change of paying off debt. So the first step is to list all of your debts, and Dave Ramsey has you list everything. And then you arrange them in order from the smallest debt to the largest debt. Next, you make the minimum payments on every debt, with one exception. after the minimum payments are made, every available dollar is put towards the first debt on the list. And because the first debt is the smallest, it can be paid off very quickly. So then you get to cross that debt off your list, and you eliminate a minimum payment that then can be moved to paying off the next debt. And so with each debt that is conquered, the snowball of money applied to the next debt grows and rolls a little faster. This is a brilliant strategy to shrink the change. And so in the first few days, and I want to underscore the days here, people pay off a couple of little debts, which really energizes and ignites that change effort. They've accomplished something. We all get really easily spooked, derailed, and demoralized, which is why a sense of progress is so critical. So you're really focusing on these small incremental wins. So what we find so often when we're working with our client organizations and change efforts is the leaders typically think about these big, swooping, grandiose changes. Well, change is nothing more than a series of small incremental steps. Small incremental steps. So if you want everyone to transition to a collaboration solution for all of their work, that's the ultimate goal. But the first incremental win is they're just using it for the team meeting correspondence. Small wins. And small wins have two traits. They're meaningful and they're within immediate reach. And burnout happens when we confront the same problem over and over without feeling any progress. At least I know that's how I feel often if I'm not making progress. So you want to identify a clear milestone that you and the team will recognize enough to celebrate. And here's a word of caution. Don't let success feel too distant. How long does the team have to wait before they have a sense of how they're doing? If the answer is months, you got the wrong goal. If it's hours or days, back to Dave Ramsey and the debt snowball, within days, couples or individuals are feeling that success, that's great. You got the right win. So if the destination is a single platform where you can quickly communicate with your colleagues, track and manage tasks and projects, access and store information, and receive real-time updates on projects, then you're going to shrink this change by asking your team to use the new communication and collaboration solution just with one specific project or one specific meeting, like the team meeting example. And then once the team does this successfully, which they can and they will, you celebrate it. And celebrate it in a big, fun way. And then you move on to using the new solution in another way. Maybe it's storing documents for projects. A successful change effort is nothing more than a series of successful small incremental steps that lead to the destination. And it's your small wins that ensure the big win. So you could think about it this way. So if you've ever wanted to compete in a road race, maybe a 5K or a 10K, the first thing you got to do is just complete a mile. You don't go out and try to decide you're going to run 3 miles at once. You just get 1 mile under your belt. Then you build up small incremental wins. So now you have successfully navigated 2 of the major roadblocks to change: lack of clarity and exhaustion. So now you're probably starting to notice that your team is still not completely on board with the change, and they keep falling back into old habits and behaviors, so they're sliding backwards. And you're probably thinking, well, what is wrong with our team? Well, we're frequently blind to the power of situations. See, we have a systematic tendency to ignore the situational forces that shape other people's behavior. And this is called fundamental attribution error. And this is a phrase that was coined by a Stanford psychologist named Lee Ross. And the fundamental attribution error lies in our inclination to attribute people's behavior to the way they are. Oh, that's just how Sue is. She just will never get on board. Oh, that's just how Bob is. He's always late. Rather than to the situation that they're in. Well, Sue's overwhelmed because she's managing 15 different initiatives, and Bob is late because he has folks who are always in his office. He can't ever get anyone out. What looks like a people problem is often a situation problem. I cannot stress this enough. What looks like a people problem is often a situation problem. So your job is to tweak your environment. The great thing about change is when the situation changes, the behavior changes every single time. So change the situation. So if you've been posting your team meeting materials in the meeting requests that you send out in Outlook or Gmail or on a shared drive, post them in the communication and collaboration solution. So if I want to know the agenda and know what's going on and have the materials, I have to go into the communication and collaboration platform to access the materials I need. You're driving my behavior in the way that you want me to behave. You're tweaking the environment, aligning it to support the behavior change you want to see happen. So when you think about leading successful change, there are 5 things that I want you to think about. So the first one is you got to point to the destination. You can get really, really clear on what the goal is and why it's worth pursuing. Remember, change is hard because we wear ourselves out. And that first roadblock to change isn't resistance, it's a lack of clarity. We don't know where we're going and why it's worth it. And then once you're really clear on the destination, the next step for you to lead successful change is to tell me what to do. Specifically script the critical moves, what I need to do to reach that destination. And remember, it's specific, it's doable, and I can get a quick win because we want that energy and motivation from that win to lead us forward. Then the second roadblock is that you think that folks are just lazy. Well, it's not lazy, it's exhaustion. And so we've got to find the feeling. We've got to connect the change effort to a bigger why. What's in it for you and what's in it for them? Why is this change effort worth it for you and for them? And then to make the change easier, we're shrinking it. Small incremental wins, small incremental steps. That's how big large-scale change happens. Very, very large-scale change happens with one individual doing one thing differently. And then the last roadblock that we had was assuming that it's the people. It's just the way they are. They aren't team players. They don't want to get involved. No, it's not them. It's the environment isn't aligned to support the behaviors that you want. So we want to make sure that you're tweaking the environment, that you're shaping the environment to drive the behaviors that you want. You can do this. You can lead a successful change. Small incremental steps, celebrating the wins, being really clear and specific, and small, I cannot underscore small, is the recipe for success. Now, you've listened to this entire webinar, and I know you're busy because you've told me you've got a lot going on. So I just want to say that you're obviously really serious about improving your company-wide efficiency and enhancing your communication effectiveness and saving you and your team's time and ultimately improving your team's productivity. And I just want to take the time and really acknowledge you for that. And you're online and you're participating in this webinar and you clearly have the commitment and the determination to successfully lead change. And that's why you're the right person to lead a smooth and successful transition and adoption to a communication and collaboration solution. So here's my challenge and ask of you. Immediately after this webinar, get off the webinar, I invite you to sign in and invite 5 coworkers at redbooth.com. So start leading the transition and the adoption to a communication and collaboration solution today, right now. Sign in and invite 5 coworkers at redbooth.com. You know the pitfalls to avoid, and you know how to successfully lead change in your organization. So thank you so much for your time. Now I'm going to open it up. I see that we've got a couple of questions that have come in. We've got some time, so I want to make sure that we get all of your questions answered.
Right. Thank you, Carson. I think that was really insightful information and really appreciate you taking the time to go through that. There are some, as you mentioned, there are some questions coming in, and I have some myself. And one of them is around laziness, and several folks were asking about laziness and actually being lazy. I'll call it laziness / exhaustion, because you made that point that it's not so much laziness, but it's really exhaustion. And one of the questions on that topic was, as a team leader, how can I work against exhaustion, or what successful strategies can I employ there?
Great question. So the first thing I would suggest if you're a leader is, how do you fight that exhaustion, which you know is going to occur? So the first thing would be, in your team meetings, in your communications, in your hallway conversations with folks, celebrate the bright spots. So every time you see an example, it doesn't matter how small, of the change happening, every time you see someone chatting in the collaboration solution, every time you see documents posted in there, celebrate and acknowledge it. Because what you're doing there is you're reinforcing that change is happening. You're countering something called the echo effect, where folks start to think nothing's happening, it's so hard, and they kind of get together and say this isn't going to work. You're proactively countering that, and you're providing that motivation to keep going, because you're demonstrating we're succeeding. We've got some wins. We're moving. Good question.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, on that topic, I wanted to ask a little bit about sort of the ebb. Is there an ebb and flow? In other words, do you find with change and your experience with large organizations where you push and you kind of get some initial wins and maybe things slow down a little bit, and then you sort of have to push again? Is it more like a wave sort of change, or is it always constant?
Great, yes. Good question. It's more of a wave. So it hits a ceiling. So there, in any change effort, there's that initial burst of energy and excitement. It's new, it's fresh. You get a lot of quick wins out of the gate. And then the reality is you've probably taken care of the easiest steps in the process, and so you're now moving up in terms of complexity. And so you bump up against, it's getting a little bit harder, it's a little more complex. And so then you've got to really focus on your communication at that point around what's working, the bright spots again, and really making sure you're anchoring back into, at this point, what's in it for the team and what's in it for the individuals. So every time we have a team that hits this change ceiling and they're frustrated, or that we see the change momentum start to slow down, we have everyone involved in the change effort either write down or state publicly to a colleague or their manager in a team meeting what's in it for them individually and for the team to engage in this change effort, because we anchor back into that feeling, which is a really important motivator.
Got it. We had another question related to senior management. So in other words, this is happening sort of with folks who are perhaps impacted by the change itself on a daily basis, but what do you recommend for getting buy-in specifically from senior management with these types of initiatives?
So it goes back to what's in it for them. So do you know what the intrinsic and extrinsic motivation is for your senior leaders? So their internal motivation and their external motivation. And how can you align your change initiative to what drives them personally, as well as externally, what they're incented or motivated or held accountable for? and then asking the question and helping them see the connection on how there is a win for them and what it means for them for this change to be successful. The other thing I will say is that folks, and this happened a few months ago with an organization, a global team we were working with around leading a change effort in their meeting culture. And they were really frustrated because the most senior leader in the organization wasn't completely bought in. And they were concerned. They're like, we don't think we need to move forward. We don't think we can move forward without their buy-in. And our approach was, you have their buy-in because they've signed our contract and they've agreed to it. So you're going to need to lead the change from the bottom up. So you need to demonstrate and start to act as if the change has occurred, and we're going to use positive peer pressure to get them on board. And that's exactly what happened in this organization. So everybody below this senior leader started adopting the new meeting culture. They were living into the values and the vision of it. And very quickly, this senior leader started getting in line. His meetings weren't late, and they didn't run over. It was good.
Related to that, we had another question from the audience about outside parties. In other words, what would you suggest for bringing outside players into the change process, particularly when they may not see the direct benefit that internal users would see?
Oh, so if I'm an external vendor supporting the change effort, or I'm being impacted by it?
I think it's more sort of folks who are impacted by it as opposed to the vendor themselves.
Okay. So I think I might be having a moment here. I apologize. My brain might be fuzzy. I'm not sure I understand, because if you're going to be impacted by the change, then I would, if I'm the leader, go back to what's in it for them. Because there has to be something in it for that person that is potentially a win for them. So is it easier to connect? You get information faster. It takes less time to get what you need. I would spend a little time thinking about what's the WIFM for them.
Right. And in fact, just to clarify a little bit, there was another comment here from the person who was originally asking that question. They were phrasing it more, or framing it more, in terms of consultants that they work with and collaborate with who are not members of the organization per se, but definitely collaborators.
Oh, okay. So it's your consultant that you're using the tool with, and how do you get their buy-in and support? Same answer. There is something in it for them. It makes it easier. There's one central location for them to track and manage the project. If I'm a consultant, that's one of the wins I see.
Mm-hmm. Another question I have here is from the folks in the audience is maybe you can give some advice in terms of what you've seen across many of the companies, and perhaps make some generalizations. But as you work with companies, where do you see people getting stuck with the whole change management process? From all the things that you told us today, are there areas that are particularly difficult or particularly easy, or are there any sort of commonalities that you see?
Mm-hmm. So 2 commonalities. One, every single organization we've worked with tries to make it a lot harder and a lot more complex than it really needs to be. So they want to wrap a lot of policy and process and Gantt charts around it, which isn't necessarily necessary and just makes it more complex. And then the second place that people get stuck related to that is in scripting the critical moves. They don't make them specific enough. They make them too large, and it's too hard for folks to actually get a quick win. So it's the complexity piece that is something in all of our organizations we tend to do. Change requires a little simpler approach. It's a little bit more organic, it's more behavioral, and you don't have to make it a process.
Okay. I have another question here related to, we talked a little bit earlier about how to get senior executives on board, but oftentimes some of these initiatives might not be driven by the IT organization. Maybe they're driven by the line of business. And so another organization to engage would be IT. So the question is, our whole department is really excited about making the switch, but if we need IT on board, but we need IT on board before we move forward. So how would we engage our IT team?
And the first question I would ask is, what is it that is either preventing them from engaging and being on board? What do they lack faith in? And what's their underlying concern? And my sense most of the time when we have this is it's workload, it's an additional system to support. Maybe they're not overly familiar with it. So it goes back to, it contributes to their overwhelm because it's one more thing for them to do. So first, I want to understand what really might be causing that resistance if it's there. And then secondly, what can I do proactively to take steps so that they will know it's not going to create additional workload. It is an easy, intuitive system to use, and help them also see what's in it for them. So if you're using a solution like Redbooth, you're not going to be crashing your email inbox because you have no more storage space, which my experience with IT departments, they're kind of happy when you don't end up in email jail because you got too much stuff. So potentially can save them some work.
Okay, excellent. A couple of questions were related to technology, and one was, we're not a techie office, and people often get nervous about learning new software. What would be your advice on how to help them? And I'm guessing the answer is probably identifying what's in it for me and some of the other things we talked about today, but is there something specific to the technology challenge and adoption challenge?
Mm-hmm. So make it less scary by demonstrating. So opening it up in a team meeting and showing folks how simple it is to use. So usually the barrier to entry is because we have, in our minds, we've made it a lot more complex and a lot scarier than it actually is. If you can get someone to open it, that's the first step. So open it for them in a team meeting and let folks play and see it with your support.
Okay, great. And specifically for teams who are using a application for email that they're already very familiar with, like Outlook or Gmail, how do you get them to give it up?
It's hard, isn't it? Oh,
Yeah.
it's so hard because that's an ingrained behavior. So you're going to use the same process that we outlined. You're going to ask your team, your colleagues, to start using the new solution for one specific type of task or one specific type of communication. And then you're going to let them get comfortable with just that one. Remember, we're shrinking the change, small incremental steps, that one communication piece. Then you'll add another one. And what happens is as they have success in using the platform and they see how easy it is and less cumbersome than email, the faster your adoption will happen. So it's just one thing you ask them to do in the new solution. You don't say, tomorrow you're never eating chocolate cake again. That will not ever work. It's just one tiny incremental step.
Excellent. Well, I think we've exhausted questions from the audience. So I want to take this opportunity, Carson, to thank you again. It's really been a pleasure having you with us today, and this has really been insightful information. For folks who, I'll repeat the challenge that Carson gave you. For folks who are thinking about the change, you can take those baby steps and get started and having some quick wins. If you go to redbooth.com, if you're not already a Redbooth customer or user, you can quickly get started using Redbooth and getting those quick wins. And if you're already on Redbooth, then I would encourage you to apply Carson's wisdom to your own Redbooth implementation. Also, a couple other resources I'll mention. First of all, we spent a lot of time today talking about the social and sort of behavioral and organizational challenges of moving to collaboration. In a couple of weeks, we'll be talking about some of the quantitative and financial implications of moving to collaboration. And we'll be joined by an expert analyst from IDC, Vanessa Thompson, who's actually just completed research looking at Fortune 500 organizations, how they collaborate, how much time they're spending in email, and how they're actually improving their productivity. So that will be on October 8th, and I think that will be another interesting session for everyone to attend on the topic of collaboration. Again, as a quick reminder, we'll be sending slides as well as the link to the replay to folks who registered. So if you had any audio difficulties or any difficulties viewing the slides, you'll be getting that link later on today. And with that, I'll thank folks again for joining us and look forward to being able to join you with you on another webinar sponsored by Red Booth. Thanks a lot. Enjoy your day.